from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We are most privileged to have on our program a return visit by a really accomplished performer. We welcome to the program Carole Farley, who is an international opera star, and she has taken her musical talents across the planet and performed in countries all over the world. She made her Metropolitan Opera debut in the title role of Lulu, a role that she has repeated more than 80 times in 3 different languages. Our very distinguished guest is a regular performer at the world's foremost opera houses, including the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the Canadian Opera, the New York City Opera, Welsh National, and in Zurich, Paris, Florence, the list goes on. Our guest has numerous recordings, including The Telephone, which was filmed and co-produced with the British Broadcasting Corporation. Her career highlights include the acclaimed Paris production of The Merry Widow and Lulu. Her most recent U.S. performance was in November at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, where she starred as the lead in Lady Macbeth. She is currently on tour in Europe, and after being here with us in Coeur d'Alene, she is on her way to South Africa, and she will also be touring in South America. Our distinguished guest speaks 5 languages, and she has many recordings, and we're just delighted, Ms. Farley, to welcome you back to Coeur d'Alene, and I know you're performing here, and we thank you so much for not only being on this program, but you helped the North Idaho College Foundation raise funds with your work, and
Thank you. It's
we're very grateful.
Pleasure to be here.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have Janelle Burke, who is a regular member of our panel, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
During his introduction, Tony told us something about your background, but can you share with us more about your formal background, and then also, secondly, about your most recent performance at the Metropolitan, how exciting that was?
Great. Well, I studied as a child with my father, who began me on the piano at the age of 4. And it turns out that he had, this is kind of interesting, I don't know if there's anything scientific about it, but he has perfect pitch. And so do I. And I don't know whether he taught it to me or whether I just learned it. But anyway, we both have it. And my mother was, at that time, a singer, although they both branched out into the fields of education after that. But as a child, I studied piano. And I studied clarinet for 8 years. I studied the viola for a little while. So I guess you could say that I have a rather thorough musical background.
And you graduated from an Idaho high school.
That's right, Moscow High School.
And then you went on to university training.
That's right, at Indiana University. I spent 4 wonderful years there. I started out as a double major in piano and voice, but that was really too much. I had to make a decision. So since I love the theater, I really wanted to do opera. So.
And when did you get involved in the opera training? Because that's a specialized field.
Very much so. And I was very fortunate because in Moscow, Idaho, there is a wonderful teacher, Dorothy Barnes. So she was my first teacher. I started at the age of 13 studying singing. And I did, everything that you can possibly do as far as, work in high school and so on. And then even in the summers at Indiana University, I did summer stock. And so I just, I was very lucky, and I won a Fulbright right after I left Indiana University, and I went to Germany to the Hochschule für Musik in Munich. And while I was there on my Fulbright, an agent heard me and sent me immediately to an opera house to do an audition, and they gave me a contract on the spot. So I've been singing ever since then without stop, so I am one of the lucky ones.
And that's wonderful, and one of your most recent experiences has been with the Metropolitan. Can
That's
you share
right.
with us, tell us how exciting that was?
It was an incredible experience for me, and I hope for the audience too. There were 4,000 people there. It was a matinee, and it was completely sold out. I prepared for this role for over 9 months. It's called Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk by Shostakovich in Russian. And I have made 6 records in Russian, but I had never sung this role before, so I had to learn it from scratch. So I had a Russian coach in London, I had another one in New York, and I had to, prepare pretty extensively. And one of the things which I did was to read the original short story by the Russian writer, Nikolai Leskov is his name. And it's a wonderful short story in which Shostakovich based his opera upon this short story, and it's a fantastic short story. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. And it's about the girl Katerina Izmailova. And this opera, of course, was banned in Russia by Stalin in 1934 and was revised by Shostakovich and then subsequently was done many times up until recently as Katerina Izmailova. And only recently, in 1979, Rostropovich and his wife Vishnevskaya recorded it in its original form, and it's that form that they did now for the first time at the Metropolitan Opera. It had never been done there before.
We have a real treat for our viewers. I wish we would have done that the last time we were here, but maybe they are all going to be able to see this program again. As we interviewed you, we had a lot of your recordings and we failed to use them, and thanks to your agreement, we can have our audience to hear two of numbers from your recordings. And I should add that your spouse, who is an international conductor, is involved with these. If at this time, if you would introduce those, we will share that enjoyment with our audience.
Great. Well, this particular recording which you're talking about is conducted by my husband, José Cerebrier, and we did it with the Orchestra Sinfonica Siciliana, the National Orchestra of Sicily, and it's the first record that they have ever made, and it was a compilation of arias, all by Tchaikovsky in Russian, one more beautiful than the next. Of course, it has Tatiana's letter scene on it and, things which you've heard many times, but it has some unknown arias which in fact have never probably been recorded anyplace else. And among them are two which you will hear now, which are from the opera Mazeppa, and I think it's the aria of Maria in Act 2 and Act 3. So this was quite an experience. We brought a whole team of recording engineers and producers from London, and we spent a number of days, 6 hours a day, making these recordings. So they were done in Palermo, so I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. We'll hear them now.
Great.
Be
Carole, I want to say that those recordings I have and others, and it's certainly for me personally a great experience and a satisfying part of the soul to hear your beautiful voice and the eloquence with which you present a powerful message through music. And we thank you for letting us do that, and I know our audience has found that a great treat.
I hope so.
I would like to pursue along that line, and you do something that is very, very special in the sense that although you're certainly known as a soprano opera singer, you have a great variety. Would you share with our viewers, as you travel around the world, the different types of performances that you do?
Well, I do essentially 5 different activities. Opera, of course, is one of them. Then I do orchestral concerts. As a soloist, it could be anything from the Beethoven Ninth to the Mahler Fourth Symphony, or anything which is for soprano and orchestra. I have a rather large repertoire of that sort of thing. Then the third activity would be recitals with piano, which I do a fair amount. Fourth is recordings, and the fifth is filming live opera or a concert. So that keeps me pretty busy.
Before the show we were talking about that as you travel around the world, a lot of people would go places that take vacations, but you work all the time and maybe see some things as you move around. But you, with that kind of demanding schedule, you really just don't have long periods of free time.
No, I don't have a lot of free time. In fact, I don't have very much at all. But I'm not complaining in any sense. It's wonderful. I'm one of the lucky ones who's, doing what I had hoped to do. And there's so many who wanted to do it and who deserve to do it, who, for one reason or another, weren't in the right place at the right time. So I consider myself very lucky. And as such, I try, of course, to prepare myself in the best way. But I do, take a few days here and there on one side or another and, do some fun things too. I'm kind of a normal type person.
You're always a delight to talk to. Before I go back to Janelle, I do want you to tell our viewers one other thing, that you just finished your latest recording. Would you tell us what that is?
Yes, that's rather interesting. My husband was working with this as well. We went to the Czech Republic. It was my first trip there, not his. He's worked there before, but it was the first recording there for this particular orchestra, the first international recording, although they've done some recordings for national company, Superphone. But we recorded a project which has been in the back of my head for probably 20 years, and that's the 4 last songs of Strauss and 10 orchestral songs for soprano and orchestra. So it was a difficult project. It's a lot of singing, and it's very difficult. And there's a lot of competition out there on the market. And in fact, last evening after the rehearsal with the orchestra here, we were listening to playbacks which were sent to us on a little cassette for our approval. And we have to say if it's okay or if we want something changed or, exactly how it will come out. So once we say it's okay, then they put the thing into motion to make the recording and release it.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Janelle Bird.
I have a tremendous respect for your technique, and I know that you've worked very hard on that.
That's right.
Can you tell us something about how you prepare and how you keep yourself in shape? You have to have a tremendous amount of stamina.
Well, stamina is your number
quite
one.
Extraordinary.
Absolute. You have to be very healthy, and you have to keep yourself healthy. It's a treacherous business. I compare myself to being an athlete. That's the best comparison that I can make. And as an athlete, I have to keep my body, since my body is my instrument, to keep my body in first-class shape. And to do that, I have to do a fair amount of exercise. So when I'm traveling, it's not always easy because a perfect example was last week in Spain. I was in the middle of Madrid, and I couldn't really just, run down this. I run or, do whatever I can as far as exercise is concerned. Couldn't run down the street because not everyone takes kindly to, runners in the middle of town. If you can find a park, it's one thing, but you can't always find one. So I take a jump rope along. I jump in my room. I do exercises in front of my television set sometimes. And I swim if there's a swimming pool, or I walk if there's nothing else available. So I find ways. And the other thing which I do on a regular basis is to study with my voice teacher. And I feel that that's very, very important. There are singers who are younger than I am by far who no longer are able to sing because of defects in their technique. So a voice is something which one has to keep building. It's not always, I mean, your voice is always there, but the muscles are coordinated, and to keep them in coordination, one needs another pair of ears. You can't hear yourself the way other people hear you, so you need people to tell you, this doesn't sound as well as it could, or that doesn't sound quite right, you could do that better, and you just need help with that. And that's why I study with my teacher as frequently as possible.
Can you tell us something about how many hours a day you might use your instrument, your voice?
Well, if I am in a situation where I'm rehearsing an opera, we have 6 hours of singing a day. But that means also that I have to warm up an hour before each one of those. So that's 8 hours. When I recorded these operas on television, we were filming 10 hours. So it can sometimes be very long. If I'm just working by myself, I need about 2 hours a day to keep myself in a fairly good shape. And sometimes I skip days. It's good to give your voice a rest from time to time, but one day is okay. 2 days, you begin to hear the results, and 3 days, you feel really rusty. So it's like being an athlete.
Now, not only do you keep your body in shape, but you have to keep your mind in shape.
That's right, too.
Can you give our viewers some idea about the phenomenal amount of memory work that you do?
Well, I have to memorize, I think, between 6,000 and 10,000 pages of music a year. And the trouble is, you have to take time off sometimes just to have enough time to memorize this, because if you're working and singing 10 to 15 hours a day, you don't have time to prepare all these things. So you have to really take a couple of months off, which I do. That doesn't mean I don't sing. Right. That just means that I don't accept engagements during that period of time, and I use it to memorize and to learn roles and to learn music for recordings or whatever I need to do.
Now, do you have any tricks to help
Yes.
with your memory?
Yes.
Okay. Do you share those with anyone?
Sure. Anybody, probably you have better ways of memorizing than I do, but these are the ways that I use. I'm very fortunate in that I, as a pianist, can play my own accompaniments. So that's one way that I save. I save by not having to sing things. I can sit at the piano and I can play it. I can work just on the words, for instance, all by themselves. I can listen to recordings of other people singing these. I can, do memory work that way. I can sit in a chair. I can sit in the bathtub and hold a score and just, go page by page by page. And I can also work with a pianist when I get it to a certain shape where I think I might know it fairly well. And only then do you discover where the actual holes are in your head. I also work in the middle of the night when I'm supposed to be sleeping. I'll sleep for a few hours and then I'll wake up. And then my tape recorder will start running. And I will start at the beginning of an opera and I'll go as far as I can get. And then I'll always make a mistake, and then I have to go back to the beginning, and then I start the whole thing again. So, and then when I really know the part, then I don't do that in the night.
Discipline as well.
Yes, yes.
When you were here before, one of the things that I enjoyed so much was you're talking about what you're doing now and the discipline. And I introduced the program by indicating that you speak 5 languages, but you perform and sing in more than 5 languages. When you're in a language that is not familiar to you, I know you have coaches now.
Sure.
Give us some idea of how you go through that and how you develop in a very short period of time in rehearsal the mastering of what you need for that performance.
I think I'll probably use Russian as an example. I know a lot of Russian now, but I don't really speak it. I can recite poetry, but I can't really carry on a conversation because I lack the fundamentals of having studied it grammatically, which I hope to correct, but my time is so limited that I haven't had a chance yet. But what I do, Russian is in the Cyrillic alphabet, which I do read to a certain extent. So it has to be what's called transliterated. And that means that either you have to get a transliteration or you have to get somebody to transliterate it for you. So that means that you have to sit down and you write out phonetically what each word is. Then, of course, you have to know what every word means. And once that's done, then you have to incorporate that with the vocal line. So it's a rather lengthy process, whereas in Russian, French, Italian, German, Spanish, whatever, one can just read it off and you don't have to worry about this doing something phonetically. But you also have to make sure that you can read it sufficiently well while you're learning it, so it has to be legible and so on. So it takes a fair amount of time, and I work with a Russian coach, and they correct you. They make tapes for you so that you can listen to it properly spoken. And then I will sometimes make a tape of myself singing it and have them correct it. So, you know, it takes a fair amount of time. It's not easy.
I know the audience just must be mesmerized by the fact of all those things you have to do. And it's so good to be able in this program to let the public know what is in preparation. Another thing that is intriguing to me is that because cultures are very different as you perform, for example, at the great opera houses around the world, tell us some of the uniqueness of different audiences in different parts of the world that are different from somewhere else.
Well, that's an interesting question. You wouldn't think that there would be a difference in public because people are people. And if they enjoy it, well, they express their enjoyment. But there is actually a big difference between publics. And I don't know that I can explain why that's so. But I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the most incredible publics that I've ever experienced, and I think this is probably true with many of my colleagues, is in Buenos Aires, the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires. It seats 5,000 people, and it has an absolute perfect acoustic. And they have a performance, I think, probably every day, maybe more than one every day. And the house is always full. And I did recently a production of Mahagoni by Kurt Weill there. And in fact, it was so successful, I had to come back and do it again the next year. But when we finished the opera, I think the applause went on for over an hour. Then I had to sign autographs for another hour. And the performance doesn't start till 9, so that meant I got out of there at 2 in the morning. And then one is hungry, in fact starving by then, so then you have to find a restaurant and eat something. So it turns out to be 5 o'clock in the morning before you actually get home. So it's a kind of a lengthy operation. But that's one public, which is phenomenal. Italian publics are also very warm. Other publics are warm, but they don't express themselves in the same way. And I think it has to do with the temperament of a certain public. Latins, I think, tend to express themselves more than, let's say, Scandinavian or German public, which is more restrained. Having said that, you can have great publics in Munich or in Vienna or any place, really. American publics are fantastic. At the Met, for instance, I had an ovation which lasted, I don't know how long, but people were standing up and cheering, and it took a long time. So it's a gratifying part of our business, and one of the thrills of performing is to know that you've reached your public and hopefully made them enjoy and understand something. But on the other hand, you have to realize that if a public doesn't respond like that, it doesn't mean that they don't enjoy it. They just have different ways of expressing it.
I just had to share this story. You remind me, I was listening to public radio the other day, and a singer was being interviewed, and she took some time off with her family, and she said she missed what you're talking about, the audience, and she went back to her. She says, you do not get standing ovations for doing a great dinner party.
No.
But that you do for performing.
That's right.
So now we have less than 2 minutes.
We have a very short time, but opera is so popular right now in
Yes.
this country. And one of the things that's happening, too, is videotaping.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about your experiences with videotaping?
Well, I did those 2 operas with the BBC and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which was done especially for television. And I wanted to do something special. We did The Telephone by Menotti and The Human Voice, La Voix Humaine by Francis Poulenc. And I wanted to do it live, which means that, of course, it was filmed live, but it was not done on what's called playback. In other words, I was actually singing at the time that it was recorded, and it was done, very interestingly, my husband was recording that one as well with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and he was in another building, in another city. He was in Edinburgh, and I was in Glasgow.
Interrupt. I'm so sorry we're out of time. Carole Farley, on behalf
Yes.
of Janelle Burke and our staff, thank you. It's been a great treat having you here.
Great.
And good luck to you in the future.
A great pleasure. Thank
Ladies
you.
and gentlemen, I know you found this a wonderful program with Carole Farley, and I hope you'll be with us again next week when we will discuss yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.